I was born in 1968. That was the year they tried to assassinate hope in America. They killed Bobby Kennedy. They killed Dr. King. They took a lot of young people and beat their heads open in Chicago. And they tried to assassinate hope in our country. Many of the people here were the people who kept that candle of hope alive in a very, very difficult period. It's Sunday, so I guess I can talk about 40 years in the wilderness, from 1968 to 2008. And it took that long for hope to come back to our country as a mass phenomenon. 40 years. 40 years. And I don't know about you. I believe in the politics of hope. I believe that hope is a renewable resource in our country. But it comes back in very long arcs. And I don't care how viciously any of us are targeted by the politics of hatred. I am never going to surrender the politics of hope. Hope will not be extinguished in this country, not on my watch, not on our watch, period. Not by the Koch brothers, not by anybody else. This is our turn, again, in America. It would be very easy for those of us here, seeing the overwhelming odds that are now being stacked up against us, to wilt, start getting weak in the knees, start looking to the left, looking to the right. I mean, they could spend $1 billion against the president with one check, and to start getting sad. You know what that would make us? Typical progressives with low self-esteem. Not this time. See, the other side, the opponents of democracy, the opponents of justice, and really the opponents of liberty, which I'm going to get to, the opponents of those three values, justice, democracy, and liberty, when you hit them, when you fight back with them, you hit them, they get mad. When they hit us, we get sad, right? Because we're decent people. We're kind people. We're compassionate people. And we sometimes can find ourselves shocked again and again by how hard the other side plays. But we cannot afford in this moment to let shock and overwhelm and grief and disappointment disable our efforts. That's why it's so important that you're here. I was just in Detroit. It's easy for us to throw a pity party for ourselves. We're progressives. We know how to feel sorry for ourselves and be mad at the other side, but only in our own little cafes and blogs. But I was just in Detroit. 50% unemployment. 50% unemployment. We talk about a national unemployment rate of 10% and people go nuts. 50% unemployment in Detroit. And Detroit's not alone. We're in the middle of the biggest economic catastrophe in the history of our country since the Great Depression. And the American people deserve to have a partner in America's government in a crisis like this. America's government should not be missing in action. We shouldn't be struggling to figure out if we're going to re-up the unemployment benefits for people who've been out of work. It's time for us to go from talking about an unemployment program to an employment program in America. People need jobs. People need to be able to work. People need to be able to put food on the table. Why is the government missing in action? Why are they having food fight politics in Washington, D.C. as opposed to helping the American people put food on the table? Because our political process has been hijacked. Our political process has been hijacked by people who are only interested in their own gain, who are only interested in their own profit, and who are willing to tell any lie and spend any amount of money to prevent America's government from coming to the rescue of the American people. And we are here to put a stop to that kind of treachery against our country. I hear a lot of talk now about liberty. there is a movement in our country that has grown up, the Tea Party movement, and it has raised the question of liberty. And I say, thank goodness. I'm glad that someone is raising the question of liberty. There's nothing more precious to an African American than the question of liberty and justice for all. I'm glad to hear that somebody is concerned about liberty. But I think that what we have to be clear about is that liberty always has two threats. There are always two threats to liberty. One is the threat of excessive concentration of political power, excessive concentration of political authority, the totalitarian threat to liberty. And that is a threat to watch out for. But there's another threat, and it is in our country the graver threat. And that is a threat that comes from excessive concentrations of economic power. Excessive concentrations of economic power in our country pose as big a threat, and frankly a greater threat, than any concentration of political power. And what we have to remember is that our republic is founded not just on the question of liberty, but also democracy and justice. And it is when the predatory, monopolistic dimension of the economic system starts to gain momentum that then the question of justice and democracy has to come forward too. Not just liberty and property rights, but justice and human rights and democracy and the people's rights to be free from economic tyranny and economic domination. We will not live on a national plantation run by the Kochs brothers. We're not going to do that. We refuse to do that. And so now it's our time again. Many of you are the veterans of hope. You are the people who marched with Dr. King. You are the people who stood for the best in our country when times look much more difficult, frankly, than they do now. Don't forget that you are some of the people who helped to break the back of Jim Crow. We did not have a democracy in America until many in your generation stood up and insisted that we have one. Let's not forget that we had an apartheid regime right here in America. America was an apartheid regime until 64, 65, until a generation stood up and said no more. So we know what it means in our movement to face long odds, to face difficult opponents, but to stand on principle and trust in the wisdom of the American people. The one thing that the other side cannot purchase, the one thing the other side cannot buy, the one thing their dollars will never give them is the truth. The truth is that this country is much better than what we are seeing right now in Washington, D.C., with America's government missing in action in the middle of the biggest crisis we've seen in 2 generations. This country is better than that. Both parties are better than this. And the only thing that will give us the opportunity to challenge organized money power, as Bill Moyer says, is organized people's power. And if you want to know what side to bet on, if you're confused, if you're scratching your head, if you want to know what side to bet on, big money mean people, or little people with the truth on their side, look over there in Egypt. Look over there in Egypt.
Bring Egypt here.
Look back at your own struggles for democracy. If you're confused, see the difference between what's going on in Egypt and what's going on here is that's a dictatorship.
This is a dictatorship.
You get to speak on the next panel, brother. Let me speak on this one. What's happening over there is an outright dictatorship. When a dictatorship goes into crisis, that's a failure of domination. It's ugly, but it's a failure at the end of the day of domination. And we cheer the people who stand up to that. But when a democracy goes into crisis, that's a failure of imagination. That's a failure of the people to be able to see through the lies and the distortions and to reach out to each other and to hold each other and to help each other and to believe in each other and to say, under no circumstances is this country for sale to people who don't believe in America the Beautiful, who don't believe in liberty and justice for all. It's a failure of imagination. And so now we stand together once again to dream big for our country, to dream big for our children, to dream big for these kids who are coming off these planes from these wars, our young veterans. We say they will not come home to joblessness and homelessness and suicide. We will not see our children graduating from high school and college off a cliff that leads either to homelessness or a couch. They deserve better than that in America. And there's no money power that will keep us from giving to our children the country that they deserve. Thank you very much.